Hi, I'm Lisa Saunders. Welcome. And I'm excited to have for part 2, I'm going to actually do a series for a while with a good friend of mine, Patty Oat. So Patty Oat, tell us about this series that we just launched last time.
Well, I have collected letters and documents from people in southeastern Connecticut during the years of the American Revolution. So after last week, when Lisa and I talked, we decided we'd try to keep it going through all 8 years of the Revolution.
That's
so
an amazing goal, 8 years.
Yes.
Do you have enough
I do.
content for 8 years? Oh my
have
gosh.
more
I mean,
than enough.
from knowing you,
Yes.
and you're always researching, you're always going to libraries, and you fly places
Yes.
even,
Yes.
and go to places looking for these letters.
So
Anyway.
I've gotten a great collection. But for today, and actually for going forward, I thought it might be good since the letters will be from different people, that we have one consistent voice, and that would be George Washington.
Oh, okay.
Who received over 25,000 letters from the time he started as commander-in-chief, and he wrote over 35,000 letters. So, and they're all online. So
Really?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
So the one I picked for today is a letter that
What year are we
Yes,
now?
we're in 1775 in May, because
Okay.
we're going to go month by month till the end of the Revolution,
Okay.
hopefully. So we're still in May, and George Washington is in Philadelphia at the Continental Congress. He hasn't been named commander-in-chief yet, and so his diary entries are very brief, and he only wrote one letter, and it was to a friend in Virginia, where he's talking about what happened in Lexington and Concord and the potential for war. And he writes, "Unhappy it is, though, to reflect that a brother's sword has been sheathed in a brother's breast, and that the once happy and peaceful plains of America are either to be drenched with blood or inhabited by slaves. Sad alternative. But can a virtuous man hesitate in his choice? I am, dear sir, your most obedient servant, George Washington." And I chose this letter because of the slave imagery. At the time that this was written, obviously everybody was very, these big dramatic letters and big discussions of us being slaves if we're not liberated by Great Britain removing the taxes.
Oh, they were talking about all of them being, he wasn't talking just about the slaves he owned, he's
Right.
talking about everybody.
Well,
being a
basically,
slave.
what he does is most of the writers were completely, choosing to ignore the fact that they actually owned slaves, and so they were only concerned about themselves potentially becoming slaves. Although I will put in a word for George Washington that he did free his personal slaves at the end of his life. But I wanted to make the point that in southeastern Connecticut, 2/3 of the wealthy people, the elite, the well-educated, in solid careers, owned slaves.
That's amazing. I never knew that about the North.
Yes, I didn't either, till quite recently, I'm shocked to say, because I don't think it was in our history books, when we were not
Well, I
in
was
Connecticut.
educated in the Northeast.
Yes.
How about you?
I was Connecticut.
Okay.
So I truly don't think I had any idea. We went and did the Southern tour and saw the slave markets, and there was never any discussion of them being here. But in fact, they were. And, most people owned 2 or 3, and they would work in the kitchen. And probably those slaves lived, if there were just a few, lived upstairs in the attic. But there were some farms, which we're going to talk about, and in Waterford and Salem particularly, where they had a group of slave men, and they had quarters behind the house for them. And it's, the only way you can really find these things is by combing through newspapers or wills or the Superior Court
Are there newspaper
things.
articles?
Yes.
I never did
Well,
research in that time period. So I
What
didn't
there
know.
were, and I will read some ads for runaway slaves.
Oh.
And then later, we'll see that the newspaper chose to print news articles that some people freed their slaves. But I just wanted to make it clear, the reason why I started with this today, and we're going to be discussing 3 slaves, is that I wanted it to be clear that while we're all talking about fighting for our freedom, that there's a whole group of people who, their rights aren't taken into consideration at all. Although by the end of the war, there is a gradual move towards legal changes to our laws that would make slavery eventually go away. But anyway, the first person that I want to talk about is a man named Samson Cato. And I discovered...
is he a slave or an owner?
He's a slave.
Slave, okay.
A lot of slaves were named things like Caesar was a hugely popular name, Samson. And he'll come to the story again, actually, next fall, probably, if we will look ahead. But for now, he's a slave in Waterford. And the headline in the newspaper reads, Slave in Waterford was crippled by owner's sons, by R.B. Wall. In the memory of men born after the year 1800, slavery, to a small extent, was carried on by some large farms in Waterford. Old people who died in recent years could enumerate a few black men and women whose early days were passed in bondage. Some got their liberty in the War of 1812, while others became free by manumission. Some were given a few acres to plant, and some tales of the inhuman cruelty of masters to their slaves have come down through the years. The late Deacon Henry Smith, who lived on the Whitehall farm, told a sad story that was connected with his farm. And again, this is all the newspapers, his words. It was told a sad story that was connected with his farm before he was born. It seems to have been long accustomed for the Mohegan Indians to go to Pleasure Beach in Niantic every summer to fish and have a good time. The men built their huts on the shore, and their fires burned brightly late into the night. The 4 or 5 slaves connected with the farm were permitted to go out to the beach, provided that they returned by 11 p.m. 2 of the sons of the farmer were responsible for making sure the slaves were home by 11. One night, the shanty tenants were not home at 11. At the first streak of dawn, they were seen climbing over the western fence. The brothers told them not to stay out late again, or they would not be able to go out at all. And for a long time, the slaves were prompt. But one night, all but one came home from the shore. Samson Cato did not come with them. They were ordered to bed, and the brothers waited for Samson, who did not appear until dawn. He was given some lashes and was told that a repetition would mean a greater affliction. Samson was a handsome Negro and the envy of the Delilahs at the Indian camp. Not long afterward, he stole out from his quarters and went down to the beach. The brothers learned of his act and awaited his return. With the early dawn, he returned. He was bound with rope and then suffered an atrocious mutilation that left him a helpless cripple for life. To assume an upright posture, his back had to be braced. Never again would he be able to do manual labor. For their mutilation of the body of this slave, the brothers were never brought to justice. It was never known what took place in the farmhouse when the parents learned of the shocking state of the helpless slave. The boys, whose indefensible crime had made them outcasts of society, left home at 21 and never returned. Samson was living when they left and long afterward. And
so he was popular with the Native American ladies.
I think he was.
So he kept staying out too late.
And it was a wonderful image of, the bonfires and the dancing, apparently. And according to the story, they put on face paint. I don't know if that was sort of an exaggeration or if that actually was true. But in any case, the article goes on to say that Samson was given by the family a house and some land, but I've checked the land records and found no evidence of that, so I'm not sure they even did that, which would have been a kind thing to do, but I did find an entry that he purchased some land for...
Now, where do you go to find this out?
That, you would go to Town Hall in New London, and they have all the records of land purchases, and they have also the records of, normally, of slaves being freed.
Really?
They're not always there, but by and large, you can find those there. So he will, as I said, come into the story a lot later in a much better way when he becomes freed and is able to lead his own life. The second enslaved person I want to talk about is a woman named Lily. And I found her story in an ad for a runaway slave that appeared in the New London Gazette, excuse me, in 1769. And this is how the ad reads. Run away from the subscriber in New London on Wednesday morning. a Negro woman named Lily, about 34 years of age, born in this town, very black, of a slender make and middle stature, pretends to read fortunes in teacups. She both snuffs and smokes, has lost one of her 4 teeth. I know. She carried away her female child of 1 year old. It is not so black as the mother, is small and weakly. She had a large bundle of clothes for herself and child, particularly for herself, one purple and white sprig flowered calico wrapper, one striped holland, one light brown, one old dark colored striped calico wrapper, patched in the body with diverse colored pieces, 2 quilted petticoats, one is pretty good, one undercoat, 2 toe cloth shifts, a pair of white yarn stockings, an old pair of men's shoes, and for her child, a calico gown, a blue shalloon gown, an upper coat, some flannel petticoats, and 3 or 4 shifts of linen, some of them ruffled. All persons are cautioned and desired not to harbor, conceal, or carry said Negro. It is hoped that every honest person who regards the good of society will apprehend, give intelligence, or return said Negroes to their master in New London, who will pay for the trouble. Signed, Roger Gibson.
And I was most struck by the comment that the child was not as dark as she was.
Exactly. I feel like this.
So was that the master or one of his sons or one of the farmhands? I don't know.
We don't know, but it's probably, that's a much greater likelihood. Because another thing that I noticed, and it's sort of a thing that, you would think I would already realize, but I didn't in the same ways it struck me that most of these men and women who were slaves were living in households where maybe there were only 2 of them. There was very little chance to meet anyone, and actually that sometimes they were allowed to get married and have a family. And I mean, they were just denied all of the basic, things that we take for granted in our lives. But the only thing I do know that we can gather from the next ad I'll read is that she was caught. Okay. And she was brought back, and her daughter was brought back. But we don't know if she was beaten or, what price she was forced to pay for what she did. But in any case, she appears in the newspaper with her daughter again on April 30th, 1773, 4 years later. And the ad reads, "A female Negro child named Susan, 4 years and 6 months old, small of her age, bandy-legged, is pert and speaks plain, carried off by her mother, who that day in New London ran away from her new master, Joseph Minor of Colchester, to whom, on the 12th of February last, I, the subscriber, sold her and her male child, now about 10 months old, which she then suckled. The said Negro wench is named Lily, her male child, Tony. She's supposed to be about 39 years of age, is likely, of a slender middle stature, can read, has proud, affected airs, cunning, subtle, and insinuating, publishes that she is free. And it is possible she may have some forged papers in order to deceive people, which together with her insinuating manner may ensnare the unwary, who may bring upon themselves trouble and charge, to prevent which whoever pleases may see my indisputable title to the above Negroes. All persons whatsoever in general, and masters of vessels in particular, are forbid to carry off, conceal, harbor, or detain from me, the subscriber, living in New London, the above described female Negro child named Susan on penalty of law."
Wow, so even captains of ships have to know who everybody is and their papers?
But I think they probably would, because there were a significant number of slaves, but probably the ship owners were reasonably familiar. So I don't know what she thought she could do, or who might have helped her. But in any case, she was captured again and brought home. But there's no information that I've been able to find yet describing that. But what we do know is something improves for Lily, because there's an article in 1846 by a man who was very young, but born before the Revolution started, and he actually knew Lily. And so he wrote this following article about her. She was living with a new owner, Peter Harris, at his house near a stone bridge. And the author writes, "The bridge had much of the travel on it in the Revolutionary War, for not a single privateer ship sailed from this port, but that a large portion, if not all of the crew, crossed the bridge to have their fortunes told at Old Lil's." Yes, so she still did her tea leaves. And one day, some young sailors started for Lily's, and some of the unbelievers said, "Let's go back. The old lady don't know nothing, and we had better keep our dollars," because the price for each one to visit Lily and have his fortune told was $1. Well, the objections were overcome, and they all proceeded to Lil's house. The persons who underrated her skill were called first. Lil looked with her eyes as though she could pierce the center of gravity and remarked, "What do you come here for? The old lady don't know nothing. You'd better keep your dollars." Well, their unbelief was helped as they all became believers in old Lil's knowledge of the future. "I knew Lil myself. Her form was straight and very tall, and when she walked, it was with a graceful air. Her appearance was symmetry itself. In such eyes, they would glance you into a fog bank where there was none." So he must have been quite interested himself in Lil, it sounds like.
Yeah.
So what happened was when she was living, purchased by the Harrises, who were a very wealthy family in town, and when Mr. Harris died, his wife married a man named John DeShawn, also extremely wealthy. And he had, both of them had kind of a family of slaves. They had more slaves than most people owned in their houses. And so Lil had already set up a fortune-telling business in Mrs. Harris's house. She'd allowed her a room to do that. And so after Mrs. Harris remarried and left her house, she allowed Lil to keep her business there and to stay there to read the fortunes, which I think was, an incredible image to have of this woman in this house with her proud bearing and the fortunes. And Lil appears in print one more time in the Middlesex Gazette on June 26, 1786. Her obituary reads, "Lily died in New London in June 1786, a noted fortune teller."
Wow.
So obituaries were always usually just one sentence. So for her to get that was an amazing thing to happen to her. And I have to say that Roger Gibson, her original owner, his death did not make it into the newspaper. So.
What a colorful life she led.
Yeah. So the third slave I'd like to talk about is Caesar. And he was actually owned by my ancestor, Joshua Hempstead, the diarist's son, whose name was also Joshua. And Joshua, the younger, decided he wanted to sell his slave named Caesar to his brother, John Hempstead. And so the bill of sale reads in part, "I give, grant, bargain, and sell one Negro man called Caesar, being a slave for life, to John Hempstead, to have and to hold, employ, use, and dispose of as his own proper estate. I have a good right to sell the said Caesar, as he is sound, wind and limbs, and free from all encumbrances." So that notice did not appear in the newspaper, but what did appear in the newspaper.
Is that from a will?
That was from actually, it was just a bill of sale.
Oh, bill of
So I found it at the town hall in the records of land transactions. They were sort of lumped in with land transactions. But the New London Gazette, which still took money to print the runaway ads, they kind of but right around the time of the war, they seemed to take on a more anti-slavery bent, and the movement was just kind of, beginning to gather a little bit of public strength, outward strength. So they printed, and this was a news article, they weren't paid for this, and they printed in 1774, "We hear that Mr. Samuel Gager of Norwich, from a laudable sense of freedom and a conscientious regard to justice, has lately liberated 3 faithful slaves, and as a compensation for their past services, leased them a valuable farm upon very moderate terms." So that is the stories that I have for today, but a lot of these people will come up again.
Oh, they do?
Yes.
Like, I can't believe there's so much about
Yeah.
people in newspapers that you can get.
Yes, the newspapers are all online, and you can search, by topics, and so it's a wonderful thing. And the laws started to change.
Are you talking about in the North or
In Connecticut.
In Connecticut, okay.
Colony could create its own laws regarding slavery, and I am not any expert on the growing abolitionist movement in Connecticut, but I only can say from the laws that in, let me see, when was it? I think it was 1784. Yes, at the end of the war, a law was passed that if a slave child was born after 1781, that child could be freed, or had to be freed when the child turned 25.
Oh, really?
But of course, that left out the vast majority of enslaved people who, were born before 1781 and had no hope for freedom unless no obligation to be freed unless their owners willingly chose to do so. So in 1792, I'm sure due to significant pressure by anti-slavery groups, again, that's something that it'd be great to have more information on. The law was changed so that anybody who was between the ages of 25 and 84 was to be freed as long as they could be proved to be healthy, because the town did not want to have to, take care of any slaves who might have health problems who would be abandoned by their owners.
Interesting.
Yes.
So now, did you decide, you're going to tell us the whole story of the 8 years. Are you weaving George Washington throughout?
I would like for him to appear at the beginning of each month with an article with a letter that he's written or perhaps that he's received and responded to that really sort of shows where's the Continental Army at, in this particular month. Of course, there were quite a few months where not a lot was happening because he did not, instigate a large number of offensive actions. He was much more of a kind of he had to be a defensive player in a way. So there are a lot of months where everybody's waiting. And
he's so eloquent. Really, that's just the little letter you read. Now, because I know on his deathbed he told Martha to get rid of their letters. So I think there's only a couple left because she didn't see them hidden in a desk or in a drawer that got stuck. So I think we only have a couple between the two of them.
Well, I'll highlight any that because as I said, online there's a website done by the government. It's called the Founders Online, and they have done an incredible job. They have all of his letters, and they're all footnoted, elaborately footnoted.
Wow.
And then all the other men who are considered founding fathers, their letters also are online. Jefferson, Franklin, Adams, I think there's a whole, Monroe, Mason, so a whole group of people.
I think your story is going to be very new and unique because this wasn't available to authors a while ago.
No, you had to go to a lot of different places, and they're printed volumes, but this is a really amazing thing. You just have an immediate
Because I know when I
window.
talk to you off the set how excited you are when you find out different things and how you get your feelings get hurt when George Washington's feelings get hurt, or you were laughing about things about Benedict Arnold. Because I know you seem to have your favorites and your ones that you look down.
Right. Well, actually, today when I was reading over some of the things and choosing, the Shaws of New London are a perfect case of why I tend to get upset because they were extremely wealthy and ship owners and merchants. And Nathaniel died very tragically 6 months after the battle at Fort Griswold in a hunting accident. And so on his deathbed, he freed his slave and said his slave should have 10 pounds a year. Now, a lot of people, if they freed their slaves, they made their slaves purchase their freedom. But he didn't. But then Thomas, his brother, who never married and inherited piles of money, decided, once he legally went through the steps to free, his name was Caesar, that he would enable him to purchase land from Thomas for £100 to be paid off £10 a year for the next 10 years. So therefore, the freed slave, Caesar, did not receive the £10 of income that Nathaniel had wanted him to have. And I just thought, come on, Thomas, you are sitting on top of more money than you could ever spend, and you can't do this one kind thing. But there were certainly people who did.
We have about 4 minutes left.
Okay.
Is there, because like I said, I see you get emotionally involved. Like, didn't you say like even Benedict Arnold was ridiculous, his need for being seen as a hero all the time?
Oh, I have lots of opinions, and as does, I think, anybody who reads local history has lots of opinions on Benedict Arnold. So I'm going to have to try really hard
To not.
Well, actually, that's not true. I have a story next month about Benedict Arnold in May of 1775 that paints him in an unflattering light. So we'll definitely bring that up. And you know, his personality didn't change. And he actually inherited a slave when his father died. His father became an alcoholic, and the family fortunes disappeared, and so. Benedict sold his slave when he was 20 years old and inherited him because he needed the money more than he needed the slave.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to follow, are we going to follow him throughout the 8 years,
Yes.
Benedict, and George Washington throughout the 8 years?
Yes.
And then some people that are lesser known, but known in Connecticut?
The main people actually we're going to follow are not Benedict and George. They'll just be a slice of it.
Right, just to kind of give us help us to figure out where things are.
The Huntingtons, the Trumbulls, the Shaws, and then lots of letters from people who are not merchants and not wealthy, but had to know how to write and had money to purchase paper and have the time to write. And there are lots of stories we'll get into right away this summer. Lois Peters from Preston, whose husband goes off to Roxbury to serve in the army, and she's desolate because she's already lost 2 children. Her new child is a year and a half old, and she's petrified. Everybody's getting sick and dying with this sort of summer, illnesses, and she wants her husband to be home, and he's not. So.
Well, we have 2 minutes left. Is there anything, you're going to get a website soon so people can start
definitely
checking you out and checking the chronology of things. Excuse me, because that would be great if you had a timeline on it, maybe.
That's
just
a good idea.
To keep us, that helps me visualize things. And you can also put pictures up there on your blog and everything.
That's my main job.
That's your goal. I'm gonna keep after you until you do that. Well, thank you, Patty, so much for coming on the Lisa Saunders.
Okay, thank you, Lisa.
You're welcome. And let's have a spot of tea later, right?
All right.
In memory of our British ancestors. All right, thank you so much for joining us on the show, and we'll see you next week.